Well, look, thanks for everyone for being here. It's really good to see you all. Just a reminder, this is our AGM. I'm going to briefly summarise the accounts. I mean, the accounts run to some 40 pages, so it is a very brief summary. And as you've seen, if you want to see the whole thing, then there's a link to it. As always, we work to maintain and develop a thriving and diverse voluntary and community sector. So that's our mission. Thanks, James. So just a brief summary of what we do. I could have split this in all manner of ways, but the idea here is just to sort of give a broad feel for the range and scope of the work that we do. We develop strong partnerships and collaborations, mostly across our sector, but also with public sector partners. And that's perhaps best summed up, the scale of that's perhaps best summed up by saying that in the year 1920, we spent over 1.5 million with 44 partner organisations across 9 partnerships. So that was us bringing in money and then sharing it so that we can all work together to deliver really important work for local people. It's really important that being able to do that, we have a strong voluntary community sector, and our role in that during the year was that we worked directly with over 400 voluntary community organisations in the city and 200 faith groups. And we're in regular communication, primarily through a newsletter, but we've got really good, when I say we, James and one or two others have got really good at using social media, and we keep in touch with several hundred more through that. As part of our infrastructure work, we worked with organisations to raise over £2 million in the year to deliver their work, and that's in addition to the £1.5 million that we raised ourselves. Volunteering is really important, particularly at the current time. It's important because of the great work volunteers do, but often it's good for the volunteers themselves. In the year, we worked with over 400 organisations. We call them volunteer involving organisations, and over 1,000 volunteers. And that included providing more intensive support through a Building Better Opportunities fund, where we work directly with people that face significant barriers to being able to volunteer. Thanks, James. And there's more. We do work. Part of our role is to ensure that our sector has a strong voice. We do that in a number of ways, but to mention a few, through the Inclusion Board, the Cross-Sector Forum, regular third sector partnerships it would have been, but actually I've referred to gatherings because that's what we do at the moment, and a range of other meetings, really just supporting our sector, people within our sector to speak out. We spend quite a lot of time working across voluntary community sector and public sector, and we're going to hear more about one example of that in the gathering later. That's really to develop our sector's role in partnership with the City of Wolverhampton Council, the Clinical Commissioning Group in Wolverhampton, the Sustainable Transformation Partnership, which also has other names, we'll hear about them later, the university, so on and so forth. Those partnerships, I think, are becoming increasingly important. And we work alongside people so that they can help themselves on their journey. A quick adding up told me that we worked with over 2,000 people in the year through social prescribing, talent match and suit, which is our project working with people who use drug treatment services. Thanks, James. So obviously to do that we need money. I always want to say at this point that the money is just a means to an end. It's you know, we're not profit making, as no charity is, but we need money to be able to deliver our work. So it's simply there to support us to achieve our objectives and outcomes. In our annual report, there's lots of numbers, lots of figures and lots of explanations, but I'm just going to pull out the main headlines. Thanks, James. So one of those is money in. So during the year, we brought in £3.318 million. That's £3,318,000. That's slightly less than last year, although there were all sorts of timing issues about the money, so don't read too much into that. Our income has stayed broadly the same. That money comes from 12 different funders. The vast bulk of it, 98%, is restricted. That means we can only spend it in line with what we've agreed with the funders. To all intents and purposes, not really our money, we're holding it for them to deliver our work. Then 2% of our income during the year, 51,000, was unrestricted funds. That's typically from sort of earned income for we're running a payroll service, for example, and that is money that we can spend as we wish in line with our aims. Thanks, James. So that's money in. Money out, roughly the same. As I said, don't get too hung up on the differences between money in and money out. Actually, what's important is the slide towards the end, which says sort of what our reserve situation is. But in the year we spent 3.243 million. That was a lot less than last year, but last year there was some significant timing issues, particularly around Talent Match, which is our biggest project. So we paid a lot of money out towards the end of the year, whereas this time we didn't. And that's the major difference there, which is why we spent far more in 18-19 than we have in 19-20. So the 3.243 million is the money that we spent. 47% of that money was spent by way of grants or contracts with the voluntary community sector. That figure I showed you earlier of just over 1.5 million. And another, I think, figure that's worth noting is 8.6% of our funding was on central costs. So the sort of costs of running the organisation and supporting the project. So that includes rent, finance department, management, HR, IT, reception, insurance, and so on. And that figure compares well with lots of other organisations where it would be possibly over 10%. Thanks, James. So I said actually the important figure for us is this figure, our reserves. Any responsible organisation needs to have a decent level of reserves, so it's in a position to make decisions, to manage any shocks to the system, any upsets. Ultimately, and we have no intention of doing this anytime soon, it's responsible to have resources to close if you absolutely need to, and to allow a decent time to do that and look at alternatives. So it's really important that we have decent reserves. There's been some high profile cases in recent years where organisations that haven't looked after their money, suddenly the cupboard's bare, and that is not good for them. It's not good for the general public, and it's certainly not good for their customers. So our restricted reserves, first of all, are £807,000. Don't read too much into that, because as I said earlier, that's money that really is sort of held in trust, if you like. So it still belongs to the funders until we've spent it. So that helps our bank balance. We get every single penny of interest that we can from it, although that's obviously very low at the moment. But that's money that we have to spend in line with the funders, and would have to go back to them if we didn't spend it. The more important figure is the unrestricted reserves, and that's money that we're able to spend in line with our charitable aims. And those unrestricted reserves are 529,000. That's 10,000 more than last year, so that's a positive. That's a positive thing. It includes £147,000, what we call a designated fund. So each year we work out how much it would cost if we had to close, and at the moment it would cost us £147,000 to close. That covers liabilities, redundancy costs, and so on. The remainder of the money would allow us to remain open for a period of time while we looked at alternative approaches. And also it's money that we can spend on things, you know, as they need to, that may be unfunded, and we've done some of that in this year. Thanks, James. So just something about our reserves policy to put that into context. So to keep WVSC running for 6 months would cost £677,000. Closure costs, as I've said, are £147,000. So ideally, looking at charity, the Charity Commission's guidance, our unrestricted reserves for an organisation of our size would be £824,000. Our actual unrestricted reserves are £529,000. So, you know, form your own view on that. We're in a decent shape, but we're not, and I think this is important, we're not holding money unnecessarily. Our aim is to spend money in the way that we need to, but to keep ourselves and staff and partners safe. Thanks, James. So that's the money. That's what we've done in the year. I always like to say a few words about how the future may look. I say that with a smile because things are so uncertain at the moment, aren't they? But I do think that there is the potential for a greater role for our local voluntary and community sector. That's something that's really dear to my heart. I think in the year or two ahead, we may well be working with partners to maximise the impact of every pound spent on services in the city, including a greater recognition of social value. I think money that is spent on local organisations in the city is money that typically stays in the city, develops our capacity, our partnerships and our strengths. There, as we'll hear in a minute, there's a move towards a health and social care system working as one, with increasing focus on preventing ill health before it becomes acute, if you like. There are people living in Wolverhampton typically with 20 years of ill health before they die, and that's, you know, that's often not good quality of life, and some of that can be avoided. And I do think there will be increasing opportunities for collaboration, consortia in areas including health and social care and training and education. It would be nice to think that we could do something about the national organisations that come into our city and don't necessarily add value. They do some good work, but they don't add value to our city and the people living within it. And I just wonder whether locally we can do more about that than we do. And there's a few more, James, if you just want to move on to the, I think, almost final slide. And I also think we are slowly moving towards people being at the centre of decisions that affect them. I heard a phrase that I quite liked. I think I've used it in a presentation later, about people inviting us into their lives to work with them, and that is a privilege. It's not about, you know, inviting them to be part of an organisation being done unto. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, there are a different range of ways of working with people. So I think a greater emphasis on supporting people to have greater agency over their own lives, including through co-production. We've been talking about co-production for several years now. Maybe now it's starting to get traction. Maybe there's some lessons to learn from COVID that will move us in that direction. People often have the solutions to what's needed to happen to overcome the challenges that they face. So I think an environment where grassroots ideas and solutions from citizens are encouraged and supported would be a really positive step forward. And Wolverhampton for Everyone, for example, may be a way that we are able to build on that. And then a focus on working alongside people to keep them well, through tackling loneliness, developing resilience, encouraging people to take care of themselves, and thus having more healthy years of living, I think is absolutely crucial at the moment, and our sector has a really important role to play in making that happen. Thanks, James. I think that is me done. The last thing I think I really want to do, it's always a privilege to just sort of talk about the great work that happened during the year, but I wanted to take this point, in case I forget later, to say some thank yous. So I wanted to thank all the brilliant staff and volunteers at WVSC. They're an inspiration to work with, and that's been particularly the case over the last year, which has been tricky, but people have really pulled together to carry on delivering really good work. Thanks to our splendid and supportive board, many of who are on this call today, our wonderful partners, both within and outside, our splendid voluntary sector in Wolverhampton, our very generous funders, all of our customers for letting us walk alongside them, and I mean groups and individuals, and everyone for being here this morning and for overcoming the technology and for being on this call.